Explainer. Today, we're taking a completely fresh look at a pretty complex subject. We're going to examine the Indian Constitution not as some impenetrable wall of legal jargon, but as a living, breathing blueprint. Think of it as a masterfully engineered piece of architecture designed specifically to protect your personal liberties. If you want to understand exactly how your everyday freedoms are guaranteed and defended by the state, you are absolutely in the right place. Here is the architectural tour we've got lined up for you today. We'll start with the foundations of fundamental rights, then move into the scope of constitutional protection, dive into the heart of it all with Article 21, explore enforcing rights through writs, and finally wrap up with the grand democratic balance.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, Foundations of Fundamental Rights, Building the Base. I want you to visualize a giant pyramid of rights. Down at the very broad base, you have natural rights. These are innate. You possess them simply by being born human. Moving up a step, we find human rights, which are absolutely essential for basic dignity. Above that are legal rights, which are created by everyday laws like patent regulations. Higher still are constitutional rights, explicitly written out, like your right to vote. But sitting at the absolute highest echelon, right at the peak, are your fundamental rights, enshrined in Part 3 of the Constitution. These are guaranteed, justiciable, and strictly enforceable through the highest courts in the land. Now, these specific fundamental rights act as the literal load-bearing pillars of Indian democracy. We have 6 incredibly sturdy pillars holding up this democratic roof: equality, freedom, protection against exploitation, freedom of religion, cultural and educational rights, and constitutional remedies. You might notice something missing, though. The right to property was actually once a pillar, but it was deliberately removed from this top tier back in 1978 by the 44th Amendment and downgraded to a legal right. It's a great example that proves this constitutional blueprint is adaptable. It can be renovated when the needs of the nation shift. If these pillars are engineered to protect you, we need to define exactly who they are protecting you from. Fundamental rights primarily offer a shield against arbitrary actions by the state. But what exactly constitutes the state? Well, Article 12 defines it expansively. It encompasses the parliament and executive organs, sure, but it also extends to local authorities like panchayats, statutory bodies like ONG and LIC, and, crucially, private bodies acting as government instruments. Basically, if an entity wields government power, this constitutional shield applies to you.
Moving right along to Section 2, Scope of Constitutional Protection, Inside the Fortress.
Let's map out exactly who stands safely inside this fortress. Certain rights are reserved exclusively for citizens. This includes equal employment opportunity under Article 16 and the core freedoms of speech and assembly under Article 19. But look at the overlap here. Both citizens and foreigners on Indian soil share fundamental protections against things like trafficking and child labor, alongside the absolute right to life under Article 21. It shows that the Constitution protects these core human rights fiercely, regardless of nationality. Now, the crucial point to remember is that no structure is entirely immune to extreme conditions. These rights are not absolute. During declared national emergencies, say due to war or external aggression, certain freedoms, specifically Article 19 regarding speech, can be temporarily suspended. There are, however, some very vital exceptions. Thanks to the 44th Amendment, Articles 20 and 21 are golden blocks. They remain permanently secured. You are protected against arbitrary conviction, and your right to life remains untouchable under all circumstances. No exceptions.
This brings us to Section 3, the heart, Article 21. Article 21 is exceptionally dynamic, and it brilliantly illustrates how the judiciary has expanded these concepts over several decades. Back in 1950, the A.K. Gopalan case provided a pretty narrow view, merely offering protection from arbitrary executive action. But then came a massive watershed moment in 1978 with Maneka Gandhi, where the court mandated that any procedure taking away liberty must be fair, just, and reasonable. Fast forward to 1993, the Unni-Krishnan case codified implicit rights, like education. And finally, in 2017, the landmark Puttaswamy case explicitly enshrined the right to privacy as an inseparable part of personal liberty. The focus has entirely shifted from mere survival to the comprehensive right to live with human dignity.
This massive expansion brings us to a really profound legal gray area: the right to die. Think about it. If you possess a right to life, does it guarantee a right not to live? Historically, attempted suicide was a criminal offense, but the Mental Health Care Act shifted this toward a much more compassionate approach, decriminalizing the act by presuming severe stress and mandating care instead of punishment. Conversely, Active euthanasia, which involves administering lethal substances, remains strictly illegal. However, passive euthanasia, meaning withdrawing life support for a terminally ill patient, is legally permitted, provided there is a verifiable living will. It is a highly regulated, delicate balance between preserving life and respecting dignity.
Let's move to Section 4, Enforcing Rights Through Writs, the Security System.
A well-designed blueprint is totally useless without a robust enforcement system to back it up. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, the chief architect of the Constitution, famously described Article 32 as the very soul of the Constitution and the very heart of it, and for good reason. Article 32 is a fundamental right in itself. It is the specific right to have your other fundamental rights enforced by allowing you to bypass lower courts completely and proceed directly to the Supreme Court of India. Let's open up this judicial toolkit and examine these formal written commands, which are known as writs. The first tool is habeas corpus. If someone is unlawfully detained, this writ is utilized to command the state to literally produce the body, directly combating illegal imprisonment.
The second tool is mandamus. When a public official or a state organ simply fails to perform their mandatory legal duty, this writ steps in. It formally forces those inactive entities to actually fulfill their designated responsibilities.
Next up is prohibition. This one acts as a preventative measure. It's issued to stop a lower court dead in its tracks before it can deliver a verdict that falls outside its legal jurisdiction. Following that, we have certiorari. This functions as a corrective mechanism. If a lower court has already delivered an invalid judgment, lacking jurisdiction, or violating natural justice, this writ is deployed to quash that verdict entirely. And the final tool in the writ toolkit is quo warranto. This writ directly asks by what authority an individual occupies a public position. It's there to guarantee that public offices are held exclusively by those who are legally entitled to them.
So let's look at how this builds into the broader structure of enforcement power between the courts. The Supreme Court operates under Article 32, ensuring guaranteed enforcement across all of India, but strictly for fundamental rights. High courts, on the other hand, operate under Article 226. Their territorial reach is narrower, but their scope of power is actually much wider. They possess discretionary power to issue writs for both fundamental rights and any ordinary legal right. It's a highly structured, wonderfully balanced enforcement matrix.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, the grand democratic balance. A stable nation absolutely requires equilibrium, and in India, the scale balances Part 3 against Part 4. Fundamental rights are negative in nature. They restrict the state from interfering with your individual liberties. They ensure political democracy, and they are legally enforceable. Directly opposite are the directive principles of state policy. These are positive instructions. They guide the state to enact community welfare policies, aiming for socio-economic democracy, and they are not legally enforceable by courts. They are essentially the structural yin and yang of governance.
Ultimately, these core elements fuse together into what is known as the Golden Triangle. Article 14 dictates equality and non-arbitrary action. Article 19 demands that any restrictions on freedom must be reasonable, and Article 21 protects life and liberty. The Supreme Court has firmly established that these are not isolated compartments. Together, they form the unbreakable basic structure of the Constitution, functioning as a permanent, powerful shield against arbitrary state power and ensuring the rule of law.
We have successfully decoded the blueprint of your liberties today. The mechanisms and the limits are clearly defined. Understanding this framework really matters because it dictates your daily interface with the state. The critical takeaway here is that this architecture relies on active enforcement by citizens. Therefore, knowing the mechanics of this design, how will you protect the delicate balance between necessary state power and your individual liberty? Thank you for exploring the source material with me in this explainer. Stay informed, and I will see you in the next one.